everybody. Well, here we are for our Trends and Treasures at Expo West 24 post-show webinar. I appreciate everybody showing up. I appreciate everybody joining us on the tours while we were at Expo West 24. And I very much appreciate those who are my partners with me on the floor and in preparation of this. I want to kick off by telling you a little bit about ourselves and who it is that you're listening to. One, I'm Pete Brennan. I'm Vice President of Innovation over here at Mattson. At Mattson, we make food happen. We create the future of food every day. We focus on providing a comprehensive food and beverage innovation development service. And we do that by virtue of looking at strategic opportunities for innovation, identifying white space, insights that are going to drive those opportunities, and then setting our entire team of 30 plus food scientists, culinary artists, commercialization experts against it. We can help to bring ideas from insight all the way to commercialization. And we're constantly monitoring what's happening in market in order to be able to help with that. I want to introduce my two other panelists, Alice MINTZ and Derek SPRINGSTON. Alice, tell us a little bit about what you do and how SPINS is there to be able to help us all.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me, Pete. At SPINS, we ensure that we are providing our clients with a perspective on what is happening in the marketplace by being the language of CPG intelligence. We combine POS data from across the retail landscape, including the natural channel and conventional channels, with product intelligence to understand how brands are innovating in the marketplace and connecting to today's consumer. On my team, we make sure that we understand the challenges of our partners and then connect them to the right solutions for strategic and successful growth.
Awesome. And Derek?
Hello, everyone. Derek SPRINGSTON, the Chief Creative Officer and Partner at Moxie Sozo. We're a branding and design agency out of Boulder, Colorado. We've been focused on the CPG and beverage space for a little over 15 years. We've been around since '99. But really, our goal is to help brands move forward and make the difficult decisions to position themselves in the market for success. And we do that in a myriad of ways, but branding, packaging, design, and activation is what we do. Wasn't as eloquent as Alice.
But it was awesome collaborating with both of you and your teams. Before the show, during the show, and now after, this collaboration between Mattson, SPINS, and Moxie Sozo was really built to be able to layer on some different perspectives. One coming from product and innovation strategy, another coming from all of the identification of attributes, what's driving some of the performance in market through SPINS, and how are we monitoring that? And then Moxie Sozo, Derek, and team bringing to life, I think, how we're communicating some of those points and thinking about some of these macro movements in the context of identity, communications on pack, and then ultimately the way in which we're talking about some of these emerging trends. And what are those emerging trends that we've been focusing on, right? We looked at five. We looked at five macro movements that we knew were showing up over at Expo West, and I can't say we didn't see more than a lot while we were there that we're all falling into these buckets. The first that we're going to be talking about today is food RX, right? Food as medicine. This is a movement that we've been tracking for a while. It's, some call it the supplementation of food. Some call it, bringing to life those functional benefits that we're looking for to be able to take us from what had been, I think, a real focus on lifespan, and it is now moving us into a context of thinking about health span. How is it that we can lead a more well life, a life that is worth living, that is not only going to be able to support some of the different benefits around our gut health and some of the things that we've been watching. But one really key point that we see emerging and has been over the past couple of years, which is mood enhancement and I think brain health.
Mhm.
And then second key macro movement is manifesting mushrooms. If you were at the show and you didn't see a mushroom-based product, I would say I'm not sure what hall you weren't in or what conversation you weren't having, but they were everywhere. And the fun part of that is that we're starting to really see mushrooms come to life and be identified by a couple key characteristics. One, medicinal functional mushrooms, right? We're going to talk a lot about that today. There's a real nice overlap with the idea of mood enhancement in that context. And then second is structural, the structural use of mushrooms, and that is often being provided by mycelium. And so as we think about that non-fruiting component of the mushroom, there are some fantastic expressions and uses of mycelium, and these are things that we see moving forward as really important. Carbon food print, our third macro movement, right? Our third trend that we've been watching here. Carbon food print, obviously, we've been talking about plant-based for the last several years. We see plant-based evolving, and we'll talk a bit about that. But additionally, there's a real focus on food waste. Food waste, I think, is starting to express itself not just in terms of upcycled ingredients, but it's even in terms of new business forms and new ways of being able to build the business model to be able to reduce food waste. So we'll watch that. Fourth, regenerative revitalization. Regenerative revitalization is really talking to regenerative agriculture, centuries old practices that are coming back into focus. I think one, because we're understanding now the importance that those practices have in maintaining soil health, as much as providing healthier options in terms of our food system, better sourcing options in terms of the ways in which we can build some of our products that are out there, and an interesting way to be able to incorporate that even into our storytelling. Fun thing about this trend, this movement, is that we're starting to see it be able to drive new information, new stories, new life into categories that really had just become either mature and maybe didn't have much to be able to talk about. So look for this coming in dairy, in beef and animal proteins
Yeah.
as being able to come back to life and tell the story there. And then the last is Gen Z tastes on tour. There's a confluence of points that are coming together here within our fifth macro movement. But what's really interesting is that Gen Z is driving a lot of what us Gen Xers and others are tasting out there, new cultural influences with the most diverse demographic and generation that we've seen in ever. And with that comes a number of new influences in terms of cultural influences in cuisine, really fun stuff that's happening in sauces and condiments, and really a change in the way in which our palates are taking on some of the different foods, a shift from ultra sweet into more savory, spicy, and some components that are coming through. So
Yeah.
with that, I want to be able to kick us off and get us going into the idea of food RX, right? Food as medicine. And when we talk about this, we're really talking about that idea of health span, right? Not just talking about our lifespan, not how long we're living, but how well we're living. And thinking about this in the context of how can we enjoy life more. And when we think about enjoying life more, I think that really takes us into a mode of one, wanting our entire bodies to be healthy, but two, I think since the pandemic, especially, a major focus on ways in which we are eating that can help us to provide a better relationship with our food, with our bodies, with our minds, to be able to help us to think through some of the mental health issues that we are factoring into life, and how can we start to counter that with our food and with our beverages. Gen Z especially is noting here that what they had been doing and ways in which they had been eating had been possibly wrong, right? That's 2/3 nearly that believe that their eating patterns are wrong. And top 4 benefits that they were looking for, and as we started to look at Gen Z, was they wanted that emotional and mental health benefit. They wanted that to be able to come through. Even millennials are starting to think in that context. And if we all take a step back and think about the idea of what had happened over the past several years, I think that's understandable. And with that, I think that's important for us to watch. How has it been evidencing itself in market? And Alice, you guys have been watching this.
Definitely. A lot of the lifespanning to health span is about what our food can actually do for us and what is the expectation. At SPINS, we code products both across their nutrition fact panel and ingredient list, but also regarding how they're positioned to consumers in the marketplace and what functional ingredients they incorporate into their formulations. One of our product positionings is health focus. So what does a product tout in regards to its ability to do something for you? In the chart below, you're looking at the fastest growing health focuses across beverages. And we can see that the top 3 are cleanse and detox, mood support, and digestive health. We saw a lot happening with digestive health and the incorporation of probiotics into everyday sodas, and this continued to be prevalent at the show. But additionally, mood support is a big focus because if we have these generations that are saying that they're looking to food for additional benefits, it's a matter of how does that food and what are you doing to provide those? And what's especially interesting is that within beverage, it can be consumed across multiple day parts. Next slide. So when we think about what is happening in this space in regards to functional ingredient, we notice a migration of different need states starting in supplements before their transition to food and beverage. And this is the case with mood support. We see that it's an established and growing space within supplements and is just beginning to find its foothold. On the right-hand side of this slide, you can see incorporation into shots, but also these sodas, as there's a diversification across products, but also a translation into other foods. So across the show, there was mood support in supplement. Yep. There was mood support in next slide. There was mood support in supplements and beverages, but there was also incorporation of additional supplements for other benefits. So a key thing to highlight here is this moss beverage. So sea moss, we've seen an increase in people eating it in the mornings for different benefits, probiotics, metabolism, and now there's a ready-to-drink beverage. And what's especially interesting about this is the fact that it's not carbonated. And so when we think about different formulations, where is there opportunity to incorporate into such products like juice? And one other call out I will say about health span to lifespan to health span is we saw a lot in regards to blood sugar support and also increasing fiber into staple products. So blood sugar support to ensure that your glycemic index remains steady, but then fiber to help with fullness across products.
Yeah, and that was really seen within the 3 Farm Daughters in the top right. Was a brand that was really capitalizing on high fiber pasta. So, going all the way from the top left, you're seeing the more traditional supplements with a very on the nose name like Timeline, going all the way to the right and then top right, where you're looking at pastas as a way to look at health spanning and life spanning or health spanning in a different way. So we're seeing a lot of this within the beverage or beverage adjacent. So powders like a Mix Hers. The product that we're showing here, they actually released a rebrand at the show where they're kind of bridging the gap of that supplement efficacy look with this wide range. Actually, all of Alice's top three categories: mood enhancement, gut health, products that spanned almost that whole range of what people are looking for, and having kind of this less common visual trope of health, I think, throughout.
Yeah, there was a lot. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
There was a lot of really interesting stuff happening. I think even the introduction of mindfulness and or mind and body combined being released in things like sports performance drinks, like local weather, right, and what they were doing. Just a new way of thinking about, you know, what had been just all electrolytes, all hydration benefits. Now thinking about the idea of the mind being important as well, and new adaptogenic ads being moved into the space.
And what's interesting about this is how all of these products work in tandem. So if we think about those fast growing spaces of gut health and mental health, there's an increased connection, a known connection between those two. So how do products support the body's biome and natural processes? And that's what we see coming to light on this page, but also it was incredibly prevalent at Expo this year.
And speaking to some of the hierarchical or content direction that some of these brands are taking, on the left-hand side, you see this headline, "Function isn't boring." And this is kind of true to a lot of natural products now, but Food RX in particular, you don't have to be so staunch and stodgy, and you can be more approachable. You know, a brand like Poppy, who's continued to kind of shift their messaging around prebiotics and gut health more to a secondary call out and an added benefit to the brand rather than the primary hierarchical element. So we're continuing to see these vibrant colors speak to younger generations that we've been that are wanting these types of products. And it's not just about the benefit itself. It's also, you know, about what's the correlation to my lifestyle and how does, you know, it fit my personal needs as well. On the right-hand side, you're kind of seeing a smart way to go about function, but not having to add additional call outs. So these brands are kind of calling it like it is, and their names reflect what the benefit is. So a brand like Brain Juice, Mind Right, Moment, these are all things that lead the consumer into what is this product going to do for me via the brand name. So you're kind of stripping out that need for these secondary communication points.
I think that's really important as we start to think about this next trend, this next movement that we see occurring, which is really in some ways an overlap. There are a number of benefits that we're going to speak to here that start to work with the idea of mood enhancement, even work with our overall ability to take in better for you ingredients, healthier ingredients that can allow you to live a more well life. And that's manifesting mushrooms, right? As I have said to our team and across, you know, a weekend before Expo West, I was walking through Costco, and you're starting to see the demo stands up with reishi, with lion's mane, with other mushrooms that are starting to show themselves, whether it's in different foods that you're able to try and or with supplements that are being presented as really important components of the way in which we should be living. And, you know, if there's anything about the idea of mainstreaming, I think that starts to bring it to life, right? This is something that we're seeing consistently across. And I think that, you know, it's something that we've been tracking, right? Else there's a lot that's happening in the space.
Absolutely. We've been tracking this for an incredibly long time. So at Spins, we look across the label and within the ingredient list of products. So across the universe of the grocery store, does this product have a mushroom component? When we look within each of these spaces, on the left-hand side, we're looking at the broadest universe of super mushrooms. And we can unpack across the super mushroom landscape, what category are these mushrooms appearing in? And so we can see, depending on the type of mushroom, there's a different prevalence across categories. In the broadest space, this includes reishi and lion's mane, but also mycelium, maitake, shiitake, anything that has been known, any mushrooms that are known to provide a nutritional boost, adaptogenic qualities, immunity health. We see that these have been incorporated across a lot of food and beverage categories, but the very specific reishi lion's mane are being incorporated into specific spaces. Lion's mane, known for brain function, has traditionally been found in coffee beans. Start your day with a boost. But this is changing. There's two things happening where we see increased functionality being leveraged for these mushrooms are being leveraged for their functionality, but also they are now being leveraged for their physical properties. So at the show, we saw a lot of new products, lion's mane products that were being leveraged as steak alternatives. And why this is so powerful is because it's tapping into the natural properties of produce. So we talk a lot about plant-based, but we like to think of it as produce forward, and inherently there's a lot of benefits that come with these products. So what to watch for on the next slide. We see the left-hand side, specific functionality coming through, but then the right-hand side up in the top where we see these meat alternatives leveraging different types of mushrooms. At Spins, we are tracking mycelium. That is the main component in My Forest Foods, My Bacon. And we'll be breaking that out in the upcoming data releases so you can understand the size and growth rate of that space.
I think it's really important right there. Just the point that you guys are starting to break it out. We saw a lot of mycelium at the show, right? It's really important. It is adding texture, it's adding structure. It is a really neat ingredient to work with when formulating. It's the opportunity to be able to provide something that's more sustainable in addition to something that's going to allow that product to really show through and taste great. What was interesting, I thought about some of the products that we were seeing and some of the brands that were showing up over at Expo this year is that, you know, it's moving into more indulgent space. It's moving, we're starting to see mushrooms show up and to be able to provide those functional, more medicinal benefits in foods, and not only just bars, but also in cookie doughs, right? And fun drinks and other ways that we're able to think about this. And so that I think is just a really neat new way of starting to see mushrooms really manifest across categories.
Yeah, I think as we see from left to right here, the hierarchy flip that continues to happen with these more macro trend categories that are looking to go into mass. And so rather than, you know, leading with mushroom, I know there's still some brands in the functional prominence like Alm here with the lion's mane. Rather than always leading with the mushroom or leading with the function, it's starting to become this additive piece, you know, for something like the cookie dough like Do has, where it's not what they lead with, and it's like it's about the product, it's about the taste, and it's about like kind of that structural component that they're creating. And then they're like, oh yeah, it happens to be made with this. There's some mind functionality pieces here. Same with Three Spirit, a non-alc aperitif, you know, equivalent that it's more mind enhancement. It is not saying, hey, we've added a bunch of adaptogens, and you know, that is not their go-to. I think another interesting play, you know, we see Space Tea on the slide before. Some of these brands are we still saw like Melting Forest and those playing in the kind of psychedelic realm, but you're seeing the sophistication starting to come through in all these new categories within the show and within these new products that, you know, they want to lead with a good product, and then they just so happen to use these components to continue to speak to the consumer that we've talked about.
What I love,
go ahead.
What I love about this slide and just generally is how mushrooms, again, are leveraged at these different day parts for different use cases. So the functionality in the morning or throughout the day, really mushrooms at meal times, and then that end of the day relaxation. Because Derek, to your point, mushrooms have long been associated to their psychedelic benefits. They continue to rise in popularity because of that. And how do people want escapism? So how do we use mushrooms for the benefits that we know exist within such a super product?
And
even within the verticals of, oh, sorry, Pete. Even within the verticals of meat, right? Just mushrooms as meat. You've got literally breakfast, lunch, and dinner right there, our example. So it's really interesting. Yeah, go ahead, Pete.
I think I'm just playing into what you guys are saying, which is there is a, you know, non-psychedelic, more medicinal, just the ability for some of those benefits that mushrooms can deliver. As we talk about the lion's mane, as we think about the idea of reishi being incorporated into so many different products, it's fun from a formulation perspective to start to see the use of mushrooms in products and the ways in which we're starting to incorporate them here at Mattson and beyond. It's now, I think, allowing us to really take all of those benefits from a product development perspective and start to build them into products where a lot of us may not have seen them in years past, or have been too concerned about using them because we weren't sure if our audiences that we're talking to are ready to receive it. And I think that all has shifted. So it's really nice. I love it. This is a really important space for us to continue to watch. And I think, again, as we talk about segues and some overlap into some adjacent trends and movements, carbon footprint, something we've been talking about here at Mattson for a while, working with different brands to be able to help to support growth in this territory, thinking about the way in which they're developing products a bit differently. To be able to really say, how can we develop great tasting plant-based products, or how can we work with and think about ways in which we can use byproducts or waste stream from our production and move them into more profitable and then also healthier, better use scenarios. And so, you know, as we think about carbon footprint, I think there's a huge focus now that we saw at the show and beyond on food waste, and it's an issue. You know, 99% of consumers, in a study that we did just a few years ago, and this has only grown, saw food waste as an issue. Nearly zero people feel food waste isn't important, right? So those are really important numbers as we start to go forward. This is where we look at how it is that you can actually address food waste. We look to take from what the EPA had already provided in terms of food recovery hierarchy, and, you know, start to find new ways of thinking about that as it relates to our food pyramid, right, and our food recovery pyramid. So, you know, we can always look to for source reduction, and we can find ways in which we can use less, create more, but we can also repurpose waste streams. Seeing a lot of what is happening with upcycled food ingredients, right? Thinking about ways in which we can use that to be able to feed more hungry people, ways in which we can better use the ingredients that we have that we're working with so that they are not just working their way into the waste stream, and instead can provide businesses with opportunities to be able to grow revenues, to be able to drop more dollars down to the bottom line, making themselves more profitable while doing something better for the planet by not dumping those into the landfills and or not allowing those just to be sold at pennies on the dollar. So there's some really interesting work that's happening here to take on a major issue that we know can help us to battle some of the points that are important to especially millennials and Gen Z as it relates to climate, as it relates to issues that we see on a daily basis tied to food waste. And I think that's starting to evidence itself in some of the points that you guys are tracking. Alice, just in terms of on the path.
Yep, absolutely. So we partner with certification bodies to understand how their products are performing in market. And in the chart below, you're looking at products that have the certified upcycled seal. So in 2021, we're looking at the category share of these products, and we can see it's dominated by about 3 spaces. This is a massive change to 2023, where we see this certification diversifying across spaces. We saw a lot of shelf-stable fruits and vegetables at the show, and there's continued prevalence of upcycled ingredients in familiar formats, such as shelf-stable chips. So there's a huge opportunity to find new ways to incorporate once eschewed ingredients into your everyday. And this is a great way to fuel adoption, is to also make sure that you are developing products or introducing products that are aligned with marketplace needs. So a couple of things that we saw at the show when it comes to more broadly carbon footprint and being conscious of the planet are with Dona. They have a high level of standard when it comes to traceability of their ingredients. So this goes back to making sure that your supply chain is sustainable. And then we have conscious food. So back to the plant-based conversation, if a big reason why consumers were switching to plant-based is to lower their carbon footprint, we see conscious innovating with first the California roll, but then at the show they had a kimbap. So it's maintaining relevancy with your products while still being focused on how you're benefiting our global society.
I'm going to build on that. And then, Derek, I know we were talking a lot about this as well, but in addition to the idea of being able to address food waste and use of upcycled ingredients, one of the brands that I've been watching and a team over at Seal of Seasons, I think, has done something really interesting in just building the entire business model a bit differently, right? They're taking the farmer's market and they're moving it into frozen in many ways, right? Thinking about frozen on a localized basis, being able to tell the story of provenance, as it relates to the actual fruits and veggies that they're packing up into their pouches. But in addition to that, being able to stimulate local economic growth. They're being able to take, again, produce that would have potentially not been sold and gone back into the waste stream, and then been able to use that into a higher margin format. At the same time, they're able to tell the stories of local farmers and to be able to work with that on a local basis. And I think the way in which they are working with customers, the way in which they are also being able to tell their story is fantastic. But there are a lot of exceptions.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how consumers learn that story, because it is, that was one of those booths where you talk to them and understand how they're using locality is really, really interesting, and making sure that consumers pick up on that story and understand how they're helping food waste plus local farmers, I think is really interesting. Conscious, I know, is one that we talked about a lot, and I'll touch on it here too, where it really came down to like conscious, and then Melody, which is a plant-based honey, which was blowing people's minds as far as like the taste and everything. But these are just really great tasting products in approachable, formats that can, like, where there has been the plant-based seafood the last few years, but the way that Conscious is approaching plant-based seafood and using sushi and using unigiri and those sort of elements, that it just, I think everyone on the tours that got to try it with us was just kind of blown away by the taste. And you know how that format really helps tell that story. Plant-based becomes secondary. So it's this added benefit of like, this is a great tasting product that I want to purchase. It looks like it plays the part well, and then it happens to be plant-based, and then it happens to, you know, help the planet out. Um, Capturing consumers on the left-hand side, some of these brands, again, having a traditional hierarchy playing into, you know, whether it's a premium sauce or mimicking something like Spam, like Omni does, or Brahmi, who uses lupini beans that has a lower carbon footprint from a product standpoint, but they're just nailing the common kind of aisle tropes of like, this looks like a great pasta, this looks like a good mimic, and those sort of things. I know mimicry isn't always what they're going for necessarily, but those two categories are doing a great job. And then Pete already hit on the origin awareness with like Seal the Seasons and Lobo and Somo. So like, where are these products coming from, and how does that relate to quality in a lot of ways? So Lobo is a brand that uses, you know, Swiss made chocolatiering, but it's all plant-based. So things like that.
Aisle tropes. I love that.
Things we'll take away from this recap as much as we will from the show.
So, right.
You know, when we look at the packaging that's just here on this one slide, right, and with the points that have been called out, one of our tenets, one of our secret sauce elements here at Mattson is craveability, right? Has to be built into every food and beverage. And I think what each one of the brands that we're seeing here in a different way is starting to be able to really drive the idea that flavor and taste and ultimately the expectation, that promise that's being delivered is going to be something that you experience with these different foods that are being offered up. It's not just a sustainability story. They found a really elegant way to talk to the idea of in some cases food waste or sustainability and, you know, soil health and some other points, but they're doing it in a very sophisticated way, and even incorporating some new elements like, you know, Somos is in terms of cultural points that are really driving a lot of the food trends that we're seeing. So again, I think hats off. I know Seal of the Seasons had just gone through a redesign to be able to help and support that communication. So keep it up. That's important. That taste barrier, that flavor barrier, being able to bring that to life so that you can drive that trial, I think is really important. There's some great expressions up here.
You nailed it with the what are you promising, and then how are you delivering on that promise? Because you can get the first purchase, but how are you getting that second, third, fourth, and the brand love? You know, and a lot of the brands that we saw and tasted are absolutely delivering on their promise.
Well, I think going back to that idea of the promise and what is possible within the new old territories, right? This idea of being able to take the idea of regenerative agriculture, which is not new to the world of agriculture, but it is new to the way in which it's being incorporated more and more into products that are more conscious, and brands that are taking their values and being able to build that into their supply chains. Ways in which they're able to think about not only just soil health, but also thinking about that in terms of some of the social issues that we're addressing through the idea of regenerative ag. And what that's helping to do is to be able to then revitalize brands, revitalize categories, be able to tell stories and allow people to really start thinking about some of these areas differently, right? Regenerative case study, we've talked a lot on this end about just some of the different ways in which regenerative can help us to replenish our topsoil health, and to be able to think about the idea of tackling climate change, to be able to provide a more positive economic impact, not just by going back to our ways of being able to farm and being able to think about our land and the way in which we're using cover crop and the water quality at which we have that is helping to work with the land. All of this is something that cannot just be, it's not an impact on your business that's negative. It's something that can be a very beneficial impact on your business. It's definitely a benefit for the land. It's definitely a benefit for the farm workers and community around the farms. And that is something I think that as we start to see the benefits that we are able to talk about from some of what's happening within this space, consumers, again, especially, I'll go back to millennials and Gen Z, helping us to see the light as it relates to the way in which we're thinking about what we're holding brands standard to, or our standard of what we expect from brands. 45% of Americans say knowing that the workers that are producing, distributing, or serving food are treated in a fair and equitable way is important. When we start to think about, and we'll hear about this in a moment, these new certifications around regenerative organic, we're starting to see that incorporated into the certification process. That's new. That's really important. 37% seek information on social sustainability of foods, in addition to what we have consistently been talking about, I'd say over the past 10 years at least, which is more about sustainability from an environmental perspective. And then, more than 1/3 will seek out information on social sustainability of foods and beverages from the labels on the manufacturer's website. And that's important, because that is not only happening just on the website when we're getting home, that's happening while you're at the shelf. That's happening as a means by which we're able to evaluate what it is that we're purchasing. And I think that's really important, right, Alice? That's something that you guys are seeing.
Yep, absolutely. On the right-hand side, you can see attributes that are continuing to grow and find a foothold. And what's really interesting is the seeking of higher quality proteins. So we see a rise in a desire for pasture-raised, grass-fed products that are produced without herbicides. And this is also tied to the health span aspect. So if you can tie personal health to global and environmental health, we see such a nice synergy and the ability to accelerate these causes. So pasture raised, how do I make sure that I'm getting all of the nutrients that I possibly can from a meat product, but that it's also treating animals in a more humane way. When we think about slower growth rates on the left-hand side, there's updated data to be released soon, but these are also bigger and more established spaces. So if we think about regenerative organic is the next phase of organic. Organic, for a lot of consumers today, is table stakes, which is amazing that we've come to a place where that is the sentiment. Regenerative organic certified products are also organic certified, but they have additional components to help the planet. This is an emerging space, lots of conversation at Expo, and a growing space. And we continue and expect to see this proliferation, again, across different products. When we think about how this manifested at Expo, there's a modern American table that is happening. What are those products that are going to be pantry staples, everyday meal components? And a huge aspect to this is higher product purity, knowing that there's ingredient standards that I want to digest for myself, but also want my families to eat so that everyone can live a vibrant life across the supply chain and within our communities.
Yeah, that point right there, I think, is really important. This is a story that is starting to be told more and more, which is how the choices that you're making at the shelf can actually impact the way in which companies and brands decide to work into their values, into their supply chains. Some of the important points around regenerative, around organic, around the ideals, around the standards that are created to be able to help to ensure that, that certification carries with it a lot of weight. There are a lot of really positive choices that have been made to be able to help bring that to life.
Yeah, and from a creative standpoint too, it's going to be really interesting to see what retailers really prioritize it. Like USDA organic was prioritized at a time, and to make sure that that transitions to the consumer and the consumer understands what it is. I know that there are retailers that are highlighting it in those, but who's going to make it a requirement at some point potentially for their products? And because, what I'm curious about is, are we going to get to a point where the rock certification, has to be as big as the USDA did at one point, whereas like that, had to be on there and it had to be noticeable from a consumer, because it plays right into understanding, what that mission, where does it come from, shifting of perspectives of, that is going to continue, like we just said, to matter more and more.
Yeah, I'll be honest, a few years back, I was cheering when I saw New Hope, those who are helping to bring us Expo West champion this initiative. It put it in the spotlight. We've seen brands jump on board since, and year on year, we're beating the drum as the importance of this. And I think that in itself has brought more of the types of categories and brands that we see on this slide, either back to the show and or back into the spotlight in a very positive way, right? Starting to tell the story from whether it's Force of Nature and some delicious new products that they were offering at the show, to Pasture Bird, new ways in which we get to be able to tell the stories of our brands and to be able to think about this a little differently, which I think is really important. One brand that I loved that was there is, starting to, and that we probably all love, is Patagonia Provisions, right? We've heard the stories, we've been able to, I think, learn as much as it is that we can enjoy their foods. And I think that's important. And then Annie's has been a champion of this space for years, and it is great to see them continue to push on and to be able to provide, not only, I think, the brand and the products that are helping to speak to this, but the work that is going on behind the scenes in terms of dollars for research, dollars for the continuance of this initiative is really important as well. That's a company that is championing this in a big way. And then last would be Dr. Bronner's. I think we can all say we know and love, and I think is getting behind it.
Yeah, the ethics that those brands that you just mentioned, Pete, provide, again, from people that already have those as household staples, like Alice is mentioning, that's where a lot of that consumer learning is going to happen as well, where, you already have that in your pantry. The more they talk about it, the more they show it. They don't need to sell you on the product. And then it's just going to help these up and coming products, tell their story a little bit easier.
Go ahead. I know we could talk forever. I love big picture foods. It's a classic, like, staple. But what I think is also interesting with these brands is that big picture foods actually also has a unique packaging style, where instead of the traditional jar, they're in a flat format. And I like when we think about how that helps the consumer, back to the pantry staples, like the fridge stacking. If you're migrating your consumption to a fresh format, more of you're going to olives to when you're cooking to bring flavor, how do you make it easier for the consumer to use your goods? And I think that's such a cool thing. We see a lot of kind of milk packaging coming to play too. So
also shelving opportunities for packaging like that, multiple categories, multiple aisles.
Absolutely.
So, with this, I know we've got to get to our last trend, but nostalgic sustainability, some of these brands that Pete was talking about, the beef, the dairy industries, continuing to lean on those traditional visual cues of, purity in a lot of ways is how it brings back. And then the conscious consumers on the right-hand side here. Really, again, these are mission, and they're secondary call-outs on pack typically, Pasture Bird is one where really the mission is kind of told through the illustration, which we think is really great. But then Chetty's in Organic Valley, it's a ethically sourced, or it's a regeneratively sourced ingredient story that they're telling on pack.
I think it's really important. We're going to talk about in just a moment the idea of flavor and taste and everything that's being brought to life in this last trend and in this last movement. But here, what we see is that you can use your farming practices as a means of being able to speak to the quality of the ingredients that are playing into the product, and that quality of ingredients is going to show through in terms of the way that it delivers on taste and flavor. And so again, thinking about that idea of regenerative agriculture, the idea of being able to incorporate that into your practices, thinking about that from ingredient sourcing and beyond, where you're getting those products, where you're getting those ingredients, can help you to drive interest in your products. And that's important for Gen Z, right? That's where we go with Tastes on Tour. We're taking our so many of these different points that we just talked about. We're building it into one, which is this idea of incorporation of global foods and global tastes, and the idea to be able to travel through the foods it is that you're eating. There's a moment, especially in the pandemic, where we weren't able to get out. We weren't able to go see, except for what was being shown through on our screens. And I have two daughters, 14 and just about 17 years old. They are looking at and trying and thinking about new foods, new flavors, by virtue of what it is they're seeing on the screen constantly. I think we all are, right? We have more ways of being able to really experience this than ever before. That shouldn't be a huge surprise to us, but it's starting to show up in the aisles. It definitely was showing up in the aisles of Expo West. And so we know this is a key driver. We laugh about some of the different foods being Instagrammable, or some of the different brands being able to evidence themselves that way. It's really an experience, and that's what we're starting to see come to life. And that's how it is that we're starting to introduce, I think, everybody beyond Gen Z and beyond millennials, again, back to our forgotten Gen Xers, the opportunity to be able to experience some of these new foods from different countries across the globe.
Absolutely. I think what's interesting and why we're also fascinated with the Gen Z is the impact of seeing something on TikTok and how that really does translate into store sales and products rising to prominence. But it also, TikTok highlights, and social media, if you tell the story of a product before the person gets to shelf, that's very powerful. And that's what these platforms are doing. And then we see that with a desire for new experiences, kind of global tourism in global tourism in your grocery store. And so in the chart below,
Good save.
in the chart below, you're looking at the fastest growing international flavor profiles across condiments and sauces. And condiments and sauces are a space where we see a lot of rapid flavor transformation because it's an easy way to try something new, and it's very transferable onto a lot of products. What's interesting and what we're watching for in this space is, and we saw this at Expo, are new global textures. So if you think about how last year, or the rise of chili crisp, now there's salsa matcha, and different sources of heat. So getting more prescriptive about where a product is from. An example of that would be Ya Oaxaca, where it's not Mexican, it's Oaxacan. And we see that across the store and across channels.
Yeah, I thought they did a great job being able to bring to life, really something that's true to Oaxaca, but at the same time, expressions of mole that we haven't seen in a jar before, and to be able to tell that story of all of the culinary expertise that went into building that, but in addition to making it very accessible.
Yeah, accessibility, I think, like you just mentioned, Pete, is key to what Alice was saying. It's these, I think I've heard a lot of the affordable luxury piece where it's like I can spend a little bit more to get this interesting taste or flavor added to my products. Um, Somebody like Philo's, that was really interesting how the tours and how we, had to explain what that was to people of that accessibility from a tamale of, it's a tear and eat, like you would a protein bar or like you would, that is just, I think we're going to continue to see new ways and new product types, again, for that time of day or that accessibility from a literal eating accessibility point, because it's, how easy is it to put a jar of hot sauce in your bag or something like that, or just bring it with you. Bachans, we talked a lot about at the show how the relation to a traditional kind of restaurant correlation of barbecue sauce they had to like that, so that it's not only convenient, the kind of more affordable bottle for them, but it also directly relates to the barbecue people are used to getting at the restaurant, the type of sauce bottle. So there's that correlation, even though it's a Japanese style, but that allows a consumer to kind of come into the space and want to try that even more. Same with the cultural callouts of like Amsan and Afia. It's more of a subtle hint and a subtle nod. There are definitely those elements of it that say this is new, but they don't go overboard with it. And that's what I appreciate of how this category continues to evolve. There's still room for aesthetic, aside from just representing the culture and overdoing it in a way.
There's also room for your own creativity of how you want to interact with the product. It's the case with the falafel. It's what we talk about with these sauces and the walking tamales. Like, how do you make it work for you and incorporate it into the routines that you enjoy with an extra little kick?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, I love it. I think Bachan's also has done a great job of using packaging to be able to drive accessibility, to be able to even move it into new spaces within the store, as much as it is showing up in new uses at home, right? It's an everything sauce in a lot of ways. Mozie showing up last year with their chutney, it's delicious. It is helping. There's an entire story to be told there. And it's again this expression of new cultures, new introduction to foods that I think many were not aware of. And I love this. We love this here because it's taking things that you may not know how to make yourself at home quite yet. You may have tried it at different restaurants. Again, an easy way to be able to find some foods and to be able to try it for the first time. Those are now entering into the frozen aisle, into the refrigerated aisle, into shelf stable even. So we're finding new ways to be able to experience new cultures, and I think that's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.
I think with all of that, we are coming to the end of our post-show recap. And I just want to thank you, Alice and Derek, for all of the help that Spins and Moxie Sozo had provided. Thanks to the team here at Mattson, and thanks to everybody who joined us on the tours and everybody who has joined us today for the recap. So thank you all very much. Please reach out if you have any questions, if you'd like to learn more. This deck is going to be available to everybody, and we will talk to you soon.
Thank you. It was so
Thanks,
fun.
Alice. Thanks, Pete.
Yes.
Nice job, everybody.